daring convert the heathens.
Funny thing about that clip, it was 1000% based on a true gaming company. If you are of a certain religious faith or had your own Rod and Todd in your life, you may remember a few classics like Bible Adventures or Spiritual Warfare. The plot of these games, playing as a biblical hero in a Mario-style way, seems like something straight out of The Simpsons. But the developer of these games, Wisdom Tree, was an insanely popular developer who successfully captured a highly unique niche. What makes the story of Wisdom Tree so fascinating isn't so much its incredibly audacious and borderline ridiculous idea, although that's pretty interesting in and of itself. Instead, I want to tell you the story of Wisdom Tree's founder, Daniel Lawton, and the company he created, Color Dreams. Lawton was not a man motivated by faith. Instead, he found a way to make money off of it. Daniel Lawton founded Color Dreams in 1988. Color Dreams was a video game development company. In interviews, Lawton said he ran into a ton of problems with Nintendo. Their costs were high, their control was dictatorial, and they charged you 3 times more for cartridges than you could pay on your own. Upset at these problems, Lawton did something remarkable. He found a way around the 10 NES system. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a brief explanation. The 10 NES is the way that Nintendo enforced control over their systems. Each Nintendo system had a lock. The key was found in every game, which was manufactured exclusively by Nintendo. The lock would request a code, and the key would provide it. No key? The system resets, and the game is unplayable. Yet, Lawton found a way in. How? I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure. One article that I read noted that Lawton was paying close attention to the Tengen versus Nintendo legal drama. In that case, and you can watch our video on it, link in the description, Tengen lied about a pending court case to obtain the source code for the 10 NES in order to make their own games. If Lawton was tracking this case, it makes me wonder if he wasn't able to grab his own copy of the source code and then make his own rabbit system, like Tengen did. Other sources have said that Lawton used the voltage spike method. In that method, the games came with a charge pump that would send out a spike of electricity, knocking out the 10 NES lock and letting players play an unlicensed game. Even after breaking into the Nintendo, Lawton and Color Dreams had a major problem. Nintendo had an ironclad grip on the video game industry and helped toy sellers make hefty profits. In 1989, Nintendo projected that they would make $2.6 billion in sales. That's nearly $6.6 billion today, and a massive chunk of toy sellers' profits. As a result, realtors had to play by Nintendo's rules, and that meant only selling licensed games. If they failed to do so, Nintendo could choose to withhold shipments of products from those stores. Suffice to say, retailers were not crossing Nintendo, and they were absolutely not doing so for Color Dreams' games, which, by Lawton's own admission, were bad. In one interview, Lawton called the games schlock, not exactly a ringing endorsement. Color Dreams' games, which included Baby Boomer, Robo Demons, and Menace Beach, were just plain bad. Being unlicensed, they didn't have to worry about restrictions on sex and violence, and their games did tend to get a little bit more graphic than something you would see in a licensed Nintendo game, albeit nothing like what was offered in games like Chiller or Custer's Revenge. The games are still really bad. The graphics look out of date, even in 1989. The gameplay is repetitive, and sprites move slowly. That's not a frame rate issue you're seeing now, that's just the way the game is played. Part of this occurred because Lawton tried to produce as many games as possible, as fast as possible, in order to make as much money as possible. Most games were built by small teams, and as a result, you had this. In all fairness, though, that wasn't the only reason. Part of Lawton's workaround for the 10 NES meant that games had to operate on tighter technical limitations. As a result, the games had fewer sprites, and the sprites moved slower. Nintendo threatening to cut off game supplies to any companies that did business with unlicensed game developers meant that Lawton couldn't go through the usual route for game sales. Instead, he had to work through alternate methods, including mail order or selling games directly to the customer himself. Later changes to the Nintendo also meant that games didn't always start. In some cases, Color Dreams employees reported that they actually had to get potential customers to read off the serial number of their Nintendos so they could be sold a game that was actually compatible with their system. Furthermore, customers often had to be sent instructions on how to actually start a game, a process that was, of course, much simpler with their licensed counterparts. All of this meant that Color Dreams was never financially successful. Some reports indicated that the company struggled to the point that payroll checks would sometimes bounce. Then, in 1991, it hit Lawton. Fine, I don't need your business anyway. Lawton did what many entrepreneurs do best. He found a new way to make money. Instead of going the traditional route, Lawton found a new distribution point: Christian booksellers. It's also possible, according to former CEO Brenda Huff, that an employee named Mike Wilson, who was a Sunday school teacher as well, suggested using Bible based games as a method to reach a younger audience without being graphically violent. So, which of these two stories is true? Honestly, I don't know. However, by Lawton's guess, there were over 9,000 Christian booksellers at the time, and they had no video games in them. Even better, Lawton knew that they didn't care about getting cut off from future Nintendo games. He was the only game in town. After all, Nintendo's guidelines, by their very design, prohibited religion in licensed adventures. This presented Lawton with an opportunity: create unlicensed games with religious themes, sell the games to Christian bookstores, profit. This also reflects what I think is simultaneously the funniest, saddest, and most hypocritical part of the story. Lawton was not a man of deep faith. His games regularly used sex and violence. Robo Demons doesn't exactly line up with my understanding of the New Testament, and the company had also obtained the license to produce a Nintendo game based on the movie Hellraiser. Again, not exactly standard religious fare. Going all in on this strategy, Color Dreams created a spin off company, Wisdom Tree, which of course is a far more religious sounding name. They then set to work making their first game, Bible Adventures. And yes, the game is terrible. That's not just my opinion, by the way. Articles in Games Radar and Electronic Gaming Monthly both place the game as among the worst of all time. The game isn't really one game, it's three. There's Noah's Ark, in which the player must collect animals. There's Baby Moses, in which the player plays as Moses' sister, Miriam, who must carry Moses throughout the game. Finally, there's David and Goliath, where you play as David, herding sheep and ultimately fighting Goliath. So, why is the game terrible, you ask? I mean, just in case you can't tell, the graphics suck, the levels are incredibly derivative, and many facets of the game, from the side-scrolling nature to the way Baby Moses is carried, is frighteningly like Super Mario Bros. 2. But did Super Mario Bros. 2 interrupt gameplay for Bible verses? Not that I remember. The fact that the game was terrible didn't matter. As noted earlier, Nintendo outright refused to license religious games. For families looking for wholesome or religious content, they now had what they were looking for. Lawson had done it. He created a new market that Nintendo had ignored. Bible Adventures sold 350,000 copies, helped by a promotional effort that specifically targeted Christian bookstores. This included promotional videos to these bookstores that extolled the nature of Christian video games. I can't say it for certain, but I'd be willing to bet that this is the best-selling unlicensed Nintendo game of all time, and it was just the start for Lawton and Wisdom Tree. Games sold by the company would be shipped across the world. And two games, Bible Adventures and Exodus, would eventually be translated into German and French. Now, if you know anything about Nintendo, you know they are lawsuit happy. The company was big, and Bible Adventures was a huge hit by any measure. This begs the question, why didn't Nintendo sue? So, they sort of did. Years before, Nintendo had sued Colored Dreams, not Wisdom Tree, but Colored Dreams. This lawsuit was over Color Dreams' 7 unlicensed games. However, Nintendo seems to have lost that suit. A judge did rule that Nintendo could sue retailers who carried Color Dreams' games, which, was bad for the company. In theory, then, Nintendo could sue the Christian bookstores that sold Wisdom Tree's games. So why didn't they? Well, two reasons as far as I'm concerned. First, there's no massive corporate structure here. Nintendo would have been suing hundreds or thousands of small independent Christian bookstores. It's not like they were suing one big Walmart. That would have been unwieldy and a waste of resources. More importantly, Nintendo probably feared the public relations backlash that would have inevitably occurred if they went after a religious game seller. That could easily have been a PR nightmare for the company. Imagine it. You're suing God. That seems like a bad idea. With Nintendo failing to bring the legal ban hammer down, Lawton and Wisdom Tree were free to keep going. And keep going they did. They ultimately produced 8 biblical games for various platforms, in addition to Bible Adventures. These games included Bible Buffet, Exodus, Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, King of Kings, Spiritual Warfare, Sunday Funday, and Super 3D Noah's Ark for the Super Nintendo. I'll be back to that shortly. A more important theme of these games? Laziness. Many of these games were directly repurposed from Color Dreams games, or even other Wisdom Tree games. For example, Menace Beach was reskinned as Sunday Funday. Sex? Out. Church? In. Not satisfied with just using the Nintendo, Lawton and his engineers found a way around Sega's version of the 10NES, the trademark security system. 4 of their games ultimately made it onto Sega in an unlicensed form: Bible Adventures, Exodus, Joshua and the Battle of Jericho, and Spiritual Warfare. In interviews, Lawton said that Sega was a deeply problematic company, going as far as threatening to sue the company if they published any unlicensed games, although Sega never followed up on that threat, probably for the same reason as Nintendo. According to Lawton, that threat made him and his engineers work even harder at creating said games. As a quick aside, Lawton didn't hate all systems for their licensing restrictions. With Colored Dreams, he made one licensed game, Crystal Mines 2, for the Lynx. In an interview, Lawton called Lynx helpful and said that the company helped you market your game. Wisdom Tree did publish one Game Boy game. That would be the New International Version of the Bible and the 20 Lost Levels of Joshua, which included text of the Bible, 2 Bible games, and said Lost Levels. And then there's Super 3D Noah's Ark. This game is, you know what? It's hilarious. It is absolutely hilarious. It uses the same engine and is basically a ripoff as Wolfenstein 3D, only instead of shooting Nazis, you're shooting sleepy food at goats to knock them out and presumably get them onto Noah's Ark. What? So here's the absolutely insane part of the story. The game isn't exactly a ripoff of Wolfenstein 3D because it's running on the same engine. id Software, which made Wolfenstein, licensed the engine to Wisdom Tree. So this actually goes back to the failed Hellraiser project. In 1987, Colored Dreams obtained the license to make a Hellraiser game, along with the license to use the Wolfenstein engine. There are stories that id gave Colored Dreams the engine for free as part of a way to get back at Nintendo for the incredibly sanitized version of Wolfenstein that appeared on the Super Nintendo, but that's not true. Instead, Colored Dreams actually purchased the license directly from id. When Hellraiser turned out to be too expensive and technologically demanding, the team at Wisdom Tree turned the gory game into a religious one. Thus, what might be the strangest and funniest first-person shooter of all time was born. In 1997, Brenda Huff, formerly a sales supervisor for the company, became CEO when she purchased Wisdom Tree with her husband. In an interview with Sega 16, Huff discussed the pathway that the company took. In the early 2000s, conversions to computer games began. Indeed, you can now download many of Wisdom Tree's games on Steam. In the 2006 interview, Huff said that more Bible-based games were coming. She also noted that Wisdom Tree was a member of the Christian Game Developer Association and exhibited at Christian conferences and with Christian groups, like the Association of Christian Schools International. Ultimately, it seems that 2 new games came out on the PC. Heaven Bound and Jesus in Space? You know, I'm not the most religious guy, but you know what? Never mind. Let's just move on. Now, that was actually it for Wisdom Tree in terms of new games, the last of which, Jesus in Space, most ridiculous title ever, came out in 2007. The company continued to sell its games on websites, appealing to a retro market, but it didn't produce anything new. That brings me to today. What happened to Wisdom Tree and to our 2 main characters, Dan Lawton and Brenda Huff? I don't have an answer, but I think Wisdom Tree is gone. The website is dead. It's no longer listed as a member of the Christian Game Developers Association. The Facebook page hasn't been updated since 2017, and its most recent post links to a Kickstarter that would produce new game cartridges. Kickstarter that failed, might I add. Now, like I said before, you can still download their games on Steam. Clicking on the company takes you to the page of Pico Interactive. Pico Interactive has a website which says that they sell retro games, and that they're having a big office move that means they won't be able to do any shipping until late July 2024. It is September 2024 as I'm producing this. What I will say about Pico Interactive is that there is at least one website that says that Dan Lawton actually works there. I can't confirm if that's true though, so take it with a grain of salt. The last apparent sighting of Dan Lawton was in 2010 when he, according to this website, worked on the Medal of Honor game. Again, can't confirm if that's true. No other information on Brenda Huff is available, although in 2007, Huff and Wisdom Tree were cited by the United States Federal Communications Commission for violating its rules regarding pre-recorded messages. Makes me wonder if they didn't blast out robocalls or something. That brings us to now. I am certainly not the first to cover Wisdom Tree games. Others, like Angry Video Game Nerd and Poe Jr., P.O. Jr.? Not sure, have both done so, and I hope I added something to this conversation. In the video game world, the company became a punchline for their horrendous quality and blatant cynicism. Honestly, it's sort of depressing. The company took advantage of good people of faith with one intention: make as much money in an untapped market as possible. It's behavior like this that absolutely fuels cynicism about capitalism. That being said, it's still hard not to laugh, at least a little. Like, the chutzpah of these guys is impressive. They saw an opportunity and they ran with it. I'd like to hope that some good came out of it. Maybe some kids who would never have been exposed to video games otherwise got a chance to do so. Maybe some people of faith who were used to being excluded from pop culture were able to feel more included in a world that they didn't feel part of or understand. Or maybe, and let's be honest, more likely, Wisdom Tree didn't do anything except exploit some people because of their beliefs. Anyway, I hope you liked this video. You made it to the end, so you must have. If you did, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. If you have more blanks to fill in on what happened to Wisdom Tree, Dan Lawton, or Brenda Huff, I would love to hear them. That being said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed. Take care, folks.